Well, welcome back to a different look of Tuesday Take. Really, a look of Tuesday Take.
That's it.
Usually this is all done recorded and not video based, but me and Kelly are out of town this week, and so we thought the coolest way to do this would be to do it on Zoom. So here we are.
Here we are. So it'd actually be 2 weeks in a row.
2 weeks, yeah, because I didn't think about that. You'll be out next week as well, having some earned time off, I think. And then just on behalf of the church, I would like to say for next week, man, take a break. I can't imagine how crazy, really the beginning of the year, probably, I don't think either one of us would have sat down and said, this is what's going to happen in 2020. And so, man, you had to navigate some difficult, but here we are.
Here we are.
You've had to navigate some difficult waters. And so, man, we appreciate you. So, dude, take some time and y'all just hang out and catch a shark or something. I don't know.
Yeah, that's what we're going to do. Me and Chat, man, we'll get a shark or something.
I believe it, man. I could see him doing it. Man, Sunday, dude, it was good and it was challenging. And I don't know. I feel like that's just been like the recurring thing in Matthew that we've seen. It's like, all right, another hard week. Good. Like,
yeah, it doesn't look like it's slacking up anytime soon, but
yeah,
I think it's good because I think, I didn't even say this Sunday, but I think one of the things that was probably good, and even if people are watching that or listening that were in person or watching that don't know Jesus, I think it was probably a good thing maybe even for them to hear because, so much of the time Christians just, and rightfully so, I think sometimes just have a very self-righteous, judgmental, holier-than-thou attitude. And Jesus addresses that and says this is not the way that we as Christians are supposed to be. We're not supposed to be self-righteous and judgmental and condemning of people. And so I think it was good for us as the church to hear, walk through, and then also hopefully it was encouraging to people that would say, hey, I agree that Christians sometimes are that way. To say, well, hey, Jesus addresses this thing, and this is obviously not supposed to be.
Yeah, absolutely.
The way that the way that it is. So
it was good, man. It was a good reminder of how we're supposed to live. I think that the whole series that we're in within the book of Matthew of Kingdom Living. I love from the beginning you've said that you're not living like this to be a part of the kingdom. You're living like this because you're a part of the kingdom. And I think it's a great reminder because I think sometimes we like to think, oh, no, I'm okay. I really am okay. And you even brought that up Sunday. I may sin, but my sin is not as bad as this or this or this. And so, man, it was a good reminder. But, man, jumping into some questions, one of the things you do remind us of is the forgiveness that we've been shown and how sometimes we don't show that forgiveness to the people around us. Why do you think we get so caught up in that?
I think we just forget easily. Same thing with judging. Whether it's I know we went back in the Lord's Prayer. He kind of says something similar. If you forgive, God will forgive you. If you don't, God won't forgive your trespass. Same thing with judging. The way you judge other people is the way God's going to judge you. But kind of almost bringing about this idea of like, you need to remember. And of course, that was our first thing is we need to remember the gospel and we need to remember, what he has done for us. But I think that's the thing I just kept being reminded of is like how easy we forget what we were forgiven of, our sin that we were in or still working through in our life, and how easy we forget that and then just want to just focus on somebody else's sin. And so that was the thing that I think kept striking me just in walking through it, is like how easy we forget, our life, our sin, our junk, and immediately just want to focus, or maybe we forget because maybe it makes us feel better or justify ourselves when we can focus on somebody else's sin or, whatever. So.
Absolutely. I think it's easy to slip into that too, because then it takes the attention off of me. Then I can maybe not see myself as a bad person. And then I can just see myself as, well, I've been forgiven, but this person, how bad is this? And so
I think sometimes we give ourselves kind of the benefit of the doubt, like let's say if I do something to you, sin against you, I'll probably downplay that to an extent of being like, well, he probably shouldn't have gotten offended by what I did or said, because really, I can justify it like, well, I wasn't meaning it, he took it the wrong way. But then the same thing, you could do something to me, and then
Yeah.
you then will justify, and so we easily justify our own actions. And so
Hmm.
we can kind of downplay us, um, and, want grace and understanding on our end. But then to somebody else, when they do something to us, then it's like, okay, you really did something wrong, and you really did sin
Yeah.
against me. So I think it's easy for us to give ourselves grace, give ourselves the benefit of the doubt, but then when someone else sins, to make that so much greater than our own.
Yeah, absolutely. Man, verse 6 of chapter 7, I'm going to read it real quick. It says, "Do not give the dogs what is holy, and do not throw your pearls before pigs, lest they trample them underfoot and turn to attack you." Um, I think the previous 5 verses are like, okay, okay. And then this one comes in. And I think for the most part, like, I don't know, if I was there, I'd probably been like, what? Like, what is, we're just talking about, how does this work in? And so, with that being said, that verse being read, do you have any additional thoughts on this verse?
Yeah, so this is kind of, it almost seems like it seeks out a little bit. You're like, hey, don't judge, don't be condemning, don't be self-righteous, all these kind of things. Look at your own self, examine your own self. Oh, and then by the way, don't give dogs what is holy. Don't give, your pearls before pigs,
Yeah.
meaning that I've got to make a judgment call of who's dogs and who's pigs. And so, like in that passage, I think we said it a little bit Sunday, but dogs aren't the way that we think of dogs now. The Jewish culture, almost like a stray dog, the way, that's kind of the idea they had a lot with dogs. And especially you see in the Jewish culture, they're discussed for pigs, of being unclean, unholy. And he makes this, and I think uh, this goes with that passage. Of course, we weren't able to really dive into it a whole lot, but I think it goes with it because I think what Jesus is calling for is balance, because I
Mhm.
think there's a tendency in this of judge not, don't condemn, don't be overly critical, don't always be pointing out flaws in people, examine yourself. But then I think what can begin to happen in all of us is that because of fear that we don't want to be hypocritical, fear of that we don't want to be judgmental, we then therefore don't hold people accountable. And so there's
Yeah.
like this, I think there's trying to be this balance here of like, he's still calm, but hey, like you still have to use discernment, with this. And that's the
Yeah.
whole point of that. He's trying to bring out this, don't give dogs what is holy, don't throw your pearls before swine. Usually when he talks about this idea of what is holy or pearls, of almost the truth about the kingdom, the truth, um, that Christ is even teaching us here. And, I heard this example by Martin Lloyd-Jones, and I didn't hear it, but I read it, but he said this, in which I think it was a good display of, and I think we know this sometimes too, is sometimes, and it's not saying in this whole idea of like, some people don't deserve the gospel and other people do deserve the gospel. But we just know it's like sometimes it's just not worth having some conversation with people because
Mhm.
just we know the way they are, and it's just it never goes to a good place. And Marlon Joyce pointed this out. I think it's in Luke 23. It's where Jesus is having a discussion with Herod and Pilate. He answers Pilate and talks to Pilate, but in Herod he keeps his mouth closed and doesn't even answer Herod his
Mhm.
questions. So you kind of look at that, and that's kind of interesting take of like Jesus
Yeah.
answers one, but then he doesn't answer the other. He answers Pilate's question and talks to Pilate. Herod, he just stays silent, almost demonstrating the same thing of like answering Herod wouldn't have done any good at
Yeah.
all. And so you see that even throughout, even with Paul and different examples. And I think that's the same thing for us when it comes to whether it's true, sharing the things of sometimes people just don't want to hear it. Sometimes people uh, will be the way that he described. It says, beware so they don't turn around and attack you. So it's
Mhm.
almost he's calling for us to use discernment, judgment. Even we pointed this out Sunday, but even if you go over, we'll be there in a couple of weeks, but he says, beware of false prophets. There's some people that look like they're legit and they're not, and they're
Mhm.
saying things that are false. Those have to be judgment calls. We look at their fruit,
Yeah.
look at the fruit of their life, their teaching. And so I think he follows us up with just reminding us there has to be some type of balance in this, because I think he knows the tendency for us
Yeah.
and all of us. Because I think sometimes you're like, well, I don't want to be the judgmental person. I don't want to be that. I don't want to be that guy that goes up to someone and tells them, hey, I've been noticing this behavior or whatever. Because then the easy thing is like, well, who are you to do that?
Yeah.
Jesus very clearly, you need to deal with your own junk.
Yeah.
Um, And so I think there has to be some balance there.
Yeah, absolutely. So with all of that said, how does chapters like Matthew 18 or Galatians 6, how does that play into a verse like this?
So I think that's similar in Matthew 18. That's where if a brother sins against us, kind of the process of going first and foremost to that brother or sister. Won't deal with it or repent of it, we bring another, with us, and then if still doesn't, then we bring them before the church, aka we call it church discipline. Or Galatians 6 says that basically if you're going to restore a brother, which I love the idea that Galatians 6 brings about, even reading into Matthew 18, of that the goal is restoration, the goal is to see people walk after Jesus. But I think there's got to be balance there, and I think maybe even all of us have to, at some level, understand, like, we all need to be examining ourselves, walking in humility, walking in gentleness, even when we see a brother or sister falling or stumbling or walking through something. But that shouldn't then make us then not deal with things, because I think very clearly we're to deal with sin, and sin's not a good thing in the life of a believer. And so we want to deal with that. But I think even, of course, I don't know if you're this way, but like, if Shane, if you called me today and said, hey bro, like I got to point something out into you that's pretty sinful that you're doing, James, I'd be like, well, Shane, who are you to call me out, man? You got your own stuff. What about the log in your eye?
Yeah.
And so sometimes we can get real offensive about this and then almost weaponize this passage to then basically be like, hey, you can't hold me accountable because you got your own stuff. Why don't you, and so I think that's what we have to be careful about.
One of the things that we talked about in our home group too was like, and me and Kelly talked about it some within ourselves, is like sometimes the log and the spec conversation, we'll turn that into specifics. Like, well, maybe mine, I struggle with pride, but I don't struggle with that. And so I can call him out on this because I don't struggle with that. So obviously there's not a log of whatever in my eye. So I can say that whenever really, I mean, I don't see that as being something you can interpret from this passage.
Yeah.
What are your thoughts on that?
Well, I think it's, understanding of like, okay, let's just use this as an example. Yours could be greed. Let's just say you're just greedy all the time, just want more and more and more. And, I'm like, man, I don't struggle with that, Shane. That's pretty terrible. But I'm coming at you with self-righteousness, arrogance, pride. And, he said like, hey, look, you need to address your own life, your own self before, and even understand, even sometimes when we even maybe restoring a brother, that sometimes we can have ulterior motives.
Mm-hmm.
And I think was helpful. I didn't say this Sunday, but what was the question about? Is the goal restoration or publication?
Mm-hmm.
I love even in Matthew 18 when he says about if a brother sins or you go to them, just no one else knows about it, And so it's even like within the church of like, hey, if somebody's struggling with something, if I go to them, just me, and everything's like, we work, pray through whatever, there's no need for me to tell anybody else. There's no need for me to then, but it doesn't seem to always happen that way. And I think that's when people get burned in church a lot, is because sometimes the goal is publication. We'll end up sharing it as a prayer request or something to somebody else, or gossiping or whatever.
Yeah.
But even in that, like even in restoration, like if there's something going on with you, then me and you handle it, and no one else has to know about it,
Yeah.
Unless it becomes this thing where it's just humongous and public and all this kind of stuff. But I think it's like,
steps,
right. But it's like the goal is, restoration, and, that we handle it with the Lord, and, that kind of whole thing. So,
yeah. And I was gonna bring up those 3 questions. I was looking up on my phone. The questions you asked Sunday that we need to be asking, and you just mentioned one, is my goal restoration or publication? And number 2, man, this was one that I struggled with more, I think, than the rest of them. Is it sinful and destructive, or is it just my preference? And then the third one is, how did Jesus respond to me in my sin? Man, those are difficult questions to ask, because I think, I mean, we're all Southerners. I mean, we're good Southerners, and man, we love to share a good prayer request whenever prayer request time comes. But like you said Sunday, how often can we slip from, this is something I want to pray for a brother or sister about, and turn it into well, hey, let's just have a little bit of a gossip time, and I'll just let you know what I know, and then we'll pray for it at the end, and it'll be okay. And then, man, like I was saying, the second question really was one that made me really stop and think about things that I've gotten upset about myself. Is the things that some people may do, they're not sinful, they're not destructive. I just wouldn't do it like that.
Yeah, right.
And man, like really for me, that was the one that really made me think back, like, oh, okay, well, and me and Kelly, we've been walking around and doing all kind of stuff since we've been up here, and that's one of the things we've talked about is like, well, this behavior in this person isn't something that really is bad. I just wouldn't do it like that. And I can't hold it against them. And man, like those questions, that's what I was going to ask you. Like those questions, where did, obviously the Spirit directed you to those, but, how did those kind of come about?
Yeah, so I think several of them came. Well, one, I give credit to the first question. I was listening to a part of a sermon out of the Church of 1122.
Okay.
They're going through the Sermon on the Mount too. And they didn't like pose it in that way, but he just had brought up this thought of like thinking through preferences and things. And when I heard that, I was like, oh, that's a pretty good thought, like to think through my preferences, or is it sin? How am I dealing with people? So some of that, some just in reading just commentaries and thinking through things, it kind of, I don't know, just the Lord brought to my mind like, hey, it'd be good to probably ask questions.
Yeah.
And so I kind of just had jotted through just different notes, just some different questions. And so there's probably could be other questions. Like another question I thought of, this is after me and Mr. Mike Sweeney were talking, is I think, and we brought up in our home group, is I think if you're going to talk to somebody, or if you know that somebody's dealing with a sin, and it could be minor or it could be something that's pretty significant, like pretty, like this could be pretty detrimental to their life, relationships,
Mm-hmm.
marriage, kids, whatever. Is there hesitancy? That sounds weird to say that. In go into that person, or am I just real quick and I'm ready to go talk to them? Because I think like in some way of like, if there's a reservation in me going to talk to them, like, because I think it's hard to talk to people about like really serious sinful things. And is there like I don't want to ruin this relationship, and so there's this nervousness about going to talk. It's like, mate, I know I still need to go. And I think that's a good judge of like, if I'm just, this person is just quick, ready to have this conversation, maybe I need to check myself a little bit of why am I so anxious just to talk to this person. But I think if there's like just this seriousness of like, I feel a little reserved to go talk to them about it. That may be a good thing of like, being humble about it, trying to be gentle about it, of like, I don't want to ruin this relationship, like even when I go talk, like, I don't want to destroy it. I love this person, or I love this relationship. And, I want to go with the right attitude and heart, and so I think that's, and even going to the last question, I think it's going back to remember, how did Jesus treat me? What did he do to me and my sin? And I think that's always a good motive when we go to anybody about it, just to make sure that we're not in the framework of being condemning or whatever, of being like, hey, me too, like it may be a different sin, but look, there's all things that we struggle with, so I think that's a good, hopefully a good thing, for us just to remember as we go, because we definitely don't want this mentality in all of us, to be judgmental or self-righteous.
With that you brought up, I think that's the two extremes that we find ourselves in sometimes. I know in my life it's been one or the other. I have felt like I am like a spiritual police officer, and I need to just like, I've got to call it out now, and if I don't do it now, then I'm not doing it right. Or on the complete opposite spectrum of, well, if I say something, then we'll never be friends again. Then we can't hang out. Then I'm not going to have this. And you talked about, the second point you talked about was examining ourselves. Would you, in those, ask the Holy Spirit to search us, repenting and seeking God's forgiveness, don't get too prideful, and seek accountability? Do you think that whenever it comes to talking with a brother or a sister, do you think that those four things should also be something that we pray through, think through, and address before we move forward in talking?
Yeah, I definitely, I definitely think that that's something that we should, in examining ourselves even before we go, just even checking our own life, checking our spiritually where we are, making sure we have good perspective on things, and we're not, and I think even just in big things, like we've seen this in this could be churches, this could be politicians, this could be any leader. When you see them being really hard against a certain issue, and then something comes out about them that's like, well, you had no right to be, you know what I mean? Just where
Yeah.
this blatant thing then comes out of their life. And so I think that's almost guarding against, so that the accusation of hypocritical or being a hypocrite can't be made against us. You know, and I understand we all can have these tendencies, but I think checking our life to make sure we're not saying this thing and then this secret thing just hiding in our life. And at any moment it could be exposed and people are
Yeah.
going to be like, well, so I think it's a constant evaluating our own heart's life, sin, dealing with that, in our own life. So
Yeah, for sure. Well, man, thank you for taking some time out and answering some questions. This is, again, Kingdom Living has been hard. And going back to, again, what you said at the beginning of this is you don't live like this to be a part of the kingdom. You live like this because you are a part of the kingdom. And man, it's been convicting and all of these things in a good way. And so, man,
no doubt. Some's been fun, some has not been fun at all. But I think it's good to be reminded like this is how you and I have been called to live,
Yeah.
and maybe even convicted about how sometimes we're modeling not after what he's teaching about the kingdom, but maybe about the kingdom of this world, and what are we modeled after? So I think these have been good reminders for us.
For sure. Well, man, thanks again for sitting down and taking some time. And thank you for checking out another episode of Tuesday Take. All right. We did. Oh, wait. I didn't stop recording.